Hi, I'm Eric Bjornstad with Bell Performance, and thanks for joining me for this edition of the Bell Performance video blog. Today we're going to talk about discussions that Congress and the EPA have been having about actually reducing the amount of ethanol in the nation's fuel supply. Now, the amount of ethanol in the fuel supply across the country comes from this thing called the Renewable Fuels Standard. Now, the RFS, as it's called, is actually a subset of the Clean Air Act. It's federal legislation put into place by Congress, of course. And the RFS basically tells the country how much ethanol it has to use in a given year. Now, the RFS has been increasing the amount of ethanol, and we're talking about billions of gallons here, every single year, and projecting huge increases for it in the future. 13 billion gallons is what we're projected to have to use in the year 2014. In 2022, that's 8 years from now, it's going to be at 36 billion gallons. That's 250%, almost triple the increase. Now, people started looking at the situation, and with all the fiasco having to do with a proposed increase from E10 to E15, people start looking at the amount of gas that we're using and the amount of ethanol that are being required, and there are red flags being raised, saying something has to change because these numbers are not working out. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we have to start looking into technical terms like the blend wall. Now, the blend wall, it's fairly easy to understand, so let's see if we can explain it. The country uses 100 billion gallons of gas each year. I think they actually use more, but for the sake of argument, we'll keep it at a round number. Now, the Renewable Fuel Standard says in 2014 you have to use 10 billion gallons. Now, we just said 13 billion, but again, we're setting up an example, so we're going to keep it round numbers. The RFS says you got to put 10 billion gallons of ethanol in there. Okay, so 10 billion and 100 billion gallons, if you do the math, it's either going to be 9 or it's going to be 10%. And so you can meet the requirements of the RFS by selling E10. 10% ethanol, 10 billion gallons, and 100 billion gallons of gas, you're good to go. However, what happens if the amount of fuel goes down? Because that is actually what's been happening, believe it or not. See, back in 2006, 2007, when Congress was putting together these projections into the future, they were predicting the future. And what were they predicting? Well, they were saying, heck, gas usage has been going up year after year after year. We're fighting in some Gulf wars, so the oil's flowing. We're just going to keep using tons of gas, and so therefore we're going to have to increase and keep increasing the amount of ethanol in order to in order to keep up with that. But what actually happened, or has happened, is that the amount of gas has gone down by a fairly decent amount. People are driving more fuel-efficient cars. There's been big strides in the auto industry with respect to that. People are being greener. They're driving more hybrids. Basically, people are using less gas, not more. And so they're running up against this blend wall where the RFS says, hey, you got to put 36 billion gallons of ethanol in gasoline by 2022. But if the amount of gas is going down, then the only way to meet that requirement is to step up the percentage, right? It's a simple mathematical problem. You got to go from E10 to E15 if you're going to meet that mandated requirement. And because E15 has had so much controversy, so many problems associated with people saying, look, we can't do that. We can't force everyone to go from E10 to E15. We've got to lower the RFS. We've got to lower the amount. And so that is why Congress and the EPA are discussing this. Now, when they have these hearings, they get Congress, they get the EPA to testify, but those aren't the only people that speak. They also bring in industry leaders. And they bring in pro-ethanol people, they bring in anti-ethanol people. The anti-ethanol people, of course, it's all doom and gloom. Ethanol is terrible. It's the worst thing that's ever happened. Pro-ethanol people, of course, the other side. Ethanol is great. It's going to make us energy independent, helps farmers, all that stuff. Um, most industry professionals on the oil side are really pessimistic about what's going to happen to gas prices if they raise if they don't do something about the blend wellness. Another thing that they point out, though, this is interesting. You have these things called RINs, R-I-N, which it's an acronym, stands for Renewable Identification Number. And a RIN is just like what they call a carbon credit. Power plants, power generation facilities are supposed to limit the amount of carbon they emit into the atmosphere, by like CO2. But what they can do is they can essentially pay to emit more by buying carbon credits. They buy these credits, they can trade these credits. It's an interesting system. So they can pay to pollute basically. And these RINs, these RINs, are basically credits towards the amount of ethanol or the amount of biofuel that you're supposed to be using or blending. And what these industry people are saying is, look, if you force people to go from E10 to E15, if you don't scale back the amount of ethanol you're requiring people to use and produce, it's going to be too expensive for those people to comply. It's going to be cheaper for those people to just buy this RIN. And so all they're going to do, they're going to throw up their hands, they're going to say, hey, we're just going to buy these RINs, and we're not going to worry about it. And then, you force them to pay this tax, but you haven't gotten what you really wanted from them, which is compliance with this green fuel that's supposed to help the environment. Okay. Last thing to talk about, the relationship of Congress to the EPA. Okay, we've been as critical about E10 and E15. We've been as critical as anybody else. Whenever you think of ethanol fuel, E15, everybody blames the EPA. It's almost as if the EPA came up with the idea on its own, and the EPA is forcing everybody to do this. But if you really look at it, the way it actually works is this. The EPA works for Congress. Congress is the one that is forcing people to do things they don't want because Congress makes the laws, and in this case, the Clean Air Act and the Renewable Fuel Standard is a law. It's federal legislation. They made the mandate. The country has to use 13 billion gallons of ethanol. The EPA obeys Congress, and it is up to the EPA to say, okay, Congress has made the law. What do we need to do to facilitate this law? What mandates do we need to put into place to force people to meet this legal requirement? So, the next time that you're cursing ethanol or you hear somebody else talking about how it's all the EPA's fault, let's be a little bit more fair about the EPA. The EPA is only doing what Congress tells it to do. And we all know what a high approval rate Congress has these days, right? So anyway, hope that was interesting for you, and thanks for joining me today. If you like this, we've got a lot more information like this at our blog, of course, but also at our websites, bellperformance.com and wefixfuel.com. If you go there, I think you'll like what you see. So thanks for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.